The soldier father had only come home to see his daughter, but what he witnessed in the backyard would freeze him like stone. The sounds coming from inside the chicken coop would force him to confront the darkest truth of his life. Thorne Ravencrest stepped down from the military transport truck, his worn duffel bag slung over his shoulder. 3 years of Special Forces operations in foreign territories had etched deep lines around his steel-gray eyes, but nothing had dulled the fierce love he carried for his 7-year-old daughter, Zara. The Oklahoma heat hit him like a wall as he walked through the familiar streets of his hometown, each step bringing him closer to the moment he had dreamed about for months. His weathered hands clutched a small wrapped package, a handmade wooden doll he had carved during quiet nights in the barracks. Every detail had been crafted with Zara in mind, from the intricate braided hair to the tiny painted smile that reminded him of his daughter's infectious laughter. Zara Ravencrest had been the light of Thorne's world since the day she was born. Even at 7, she possessed an old soul, intelligent beyond her years, with eyes that sparkled with curiosity and a heart full of unconditional love for her father. Before his deployment, she would wait by the window every evening, watching for his return from base, her small face pressed against the glass with anticipation. She had been his anchor, his reason for fighting through the darkest moments overseas. The memory of her tiny hand in his, the way she would fall asleep on his chest during movie nights, and her habit of leaving crayon drawings under his pillow. These memories had sustained him through everything. The house on Maple Street had once been filled with laughter. Thorne remembered weekend mornings when Zara would wake him up by jumping on his bed, demanding pancakes shaped like animals. He would chase her around the backyard, her delighted squeals echoing through the neighborhood. Story time was sacred. Every night he would read to her from her collection of fairy tales, doing different voices for each character, while she giggled and begged for just one more chapter. Their Sunday tradition of building elaborate blanket forts in the living room seemed like a lifetime ago now. The deployment orders had come suddenly, a classified mission requiring his specific skill set, 3 years minimum, no early returns. Thorne had held Zara as she cried, promising her that Daddy would come back, that he was going to help keep the world safe for little girls like her. The hardest part wasn't leaving. It was watching her try to be brave for him, wiping away her tears and telling him she would be good while he was gone. With limited options and deployment looming, Thorne had made what he believed was the best decision. Marlo Greystone, his late wife's sister, had moved from California and offered to care for Zara. She had seemed perfect. Stable job, nice apartment, and she spoke lovingly about wanting to give Zara the mother figure she needs. Thorne had been grateful, even setting up automatic payments to ensure Zara would want for nothing. Looking back, he should have seen the calculating gleam in Marlo's eyes when she discussed the financial arrangements. The transformation had been gradual. For the first few months, Marlo had maintained the facade during their scheduled video calls. Zara would appear on screen, clean and smiling, talking about school and new friends. But slowly the calls became shorter, less frequent. Marlo began making excuses. Zara was sleeping, at a friend's house, or too busy with homework. When Zara did appear, she seemed quieter, more withdrawn. The sparkle in her eyes had dimmed, and she rarely spoke unless directly asked a question. Marlo's explanations were always reasonable. She's just adjusting, or 7-year-olds go through phases. What Thorne didn't know was that the moment his deployment check cleared each month, Marlo saw dollar signs instead of a child to care for. Zara became an inconvenience, a burden that came with monthly compensation. The girl's bedroom was converted into Marlo's home office. Zara's toys were sold online. Her clothes were replaced with cheap, ill-fitting hand-me-downs. The backyard chicken coop, originally built by the previous homeowner, had been unused for years. To Marlo, it presented a simple solution. Why waste money on a proper room for a child when this space would suffice? She threw in an old mattress, a thin blanket, and told Zara this was her special place. The wire mesh windows barely let in light. The wooden walls were drafty and damp. In winter, Zara shivered through frozen nights. In summer, the heat was suffocating. Meals became sporadic. Sometimes Marlo would forget entirely, leaving Zara to drink from the garden hose when thirst became unbearable. The child learned to stay quiet, to make herself invisible, because any noise, any request, any sign of discomfort would result in punishment. Mrs. Delilah Thornwick, the elderly neighbor, had noticed things weren't right. She'd seen glimpses of a small figure in the backyard at odd hours, heard muffled sounds coming from the direction of the old chicken coop. During her morning garden routine, she'd caught sight of Zara's pale face pressed against the wire mesh, eyes wide with a fear that made Delilah's blood run cold. But like many neighbors, she hesitated. It wasn't her business, was it? Marlowe was the legal guardian. Maybe she was being overly sensitive. Maybe there was an explanation. The uncertainty paralyzed her, turning her into an unwilling accomplice through inaction. Other neighbors had their suspicions too. The mailman noticed that toys never appeared in the yard anymore. The grocery store clerk wondered why Marlowe never bought child-specific items despite claiming to care for a young girl. But suspicion and proof were different things, and nobody wanted to interfere without being certain. Halfway around the world, Thorne had started experiencing an inexplicable unease. Military training had taught him to trust his instincts, and something felt profoundly wrong. Marlowe's latest excuse was that Zara had gotten too emotional during their last attempted call and needed time to compose herself before speaking to him again. The explanation rang hollow. His daughter had never been emotionally unstable. She was resilient, mature for her age, and since when did speaking to her father require composing herself? The more he thought about it, the more convinced he became that something terrible was happening to his little girl. His commanding officer had noticed his distraction, the way he stared at his phone during downtime, hoping for messages that never came. When Thorne requested emergency leave to check on family, he was initially denied, but his exemplary service record and the genuine distress in his voice eventually convinced his superiors to grant him early rotation. Thorne had arrived at a breaking point. 3 weeks had passed since his last conversation with Zara, and Marlowe's explanations had become increasingly bizarre. First, Zara had supposedly been acting out and lost phone privileges. Then she had allegedly started therapy that required minimal outside contact. The final straw came when Marlowe claimed Zara had asked specifically not to speak to her father because it made her too homesick. Every fiber of Thorne's being rejected that lie. His daughter lived for their conversations. She would never voluntarily cut contact. That night, he made the decision that would change everything. He would return home unannounced, without warning Marlowe. If everything was fine, he would apologize for his paranoia. If it wasn't, the thought of what he might find terrified him more than any enemy combatant ever had. Thorne approached the familiar house on Maple Street with military precision, noting details that civilian eyes might miss. The lawn was overgrown, paint was peeling from the shutters, the mailbox overflowed with neglected correspondence. But it was the silence that struck him most. No sounds of childhood, no laughter, no music, nothing that suggested a 7-year-old lived here. He moved around to the backyard, staying close to the fence line to avoid being seen from the house windows. That's when he heard it, a soft whimper, barely audible, coming from the direction of the old chicken coop. His blood turned to ice. No child should be making sounds from that location. Moving closer, he peered through the wire mesh that served as windows for the structure. What he saw would haunt him for the rest of his life. His daughter, his precious Zara, was huddled in the corner of the cramped space, sitting on a filthy mattress. Her clothes were rags, her hair matted and dirty. She was so thin, he could see the outline of her ribs through her torn shirt. But it was her eyes that destroyed him, vacant, hollow, like something fundamental had been broken inside her soul. Thorne's vision went red. Every instinct screamed for violence, for immediate and overwhelming retribution against whoever had done this to his child. But his training overrode his rage. The priority was Zara's safety, not his need for vengeance. He approached the chicken coop door, his hands shaking as he worked the makeshift latch. The hinges protested with a rusty squeal that seemed to echo across the entire neighborhood. Zara looked up at the sound, and for a moment, she didn't recognize him. When realization dawned, she didn't run into his arms like he had imagined during countless lonely nights overseas. Instead, she shrank back, instinctively protecting herself from what she had learned to expect from adults. Pain, disappointment, cruelty. The fact that his own daughter feared him broke something fundamental in Thorne's chest. "Zara," he whispered, his voice cracking. "It's Daddy. I'm here now." Slowly, tentatively, she crawled toward him. When her small, trembling hand touched his face, feeling the stubble and the scars that 3 years of war had left behind, she began to cry, not the loud, cathartic sobs of a normal child, but the quiet, careful tears of someone who had learned that noise brought punishment. As Thorne held his daughter, Mrs. Thornwick appeared at the fence line. She had been watching from her kitchen window, and seeing the soldiers return had given her the courage to finally speak. "I should have done something sooner," she said, her voice thick with guilt. "I saw her out there, heard her crying at night. That woman barely fed her. I've seen her eat scraps from the garbage, drink from the garden hose. I called child services twice, but Marlowe always cleaned her up before they came, made up stories about Zara being difficult and acting out." The elderly woman's testimony revealed the systematic nature of the abuse. Marlowe had been pocketing Thorne's support payments while spending minimal amounts on Zara's care. She had told neighbors that the child was troubled and needed firm discipline. She had isolated Zara from any potential advocates, claiming that outside contact would spoil the girl's progress. Other neighbors began to emerge, guilt driving them to finally share what they had witnessed. The postal worker had seen Zara digging through trash for food. A jogger had noticed her trying to catch rainwater in her hands during storms. The grocery store clerk confirmed that Marlowe never purchased child-appropriate food or clothing, despite receiving monthly payments for Zara's care. Thorne's first call was to 911, his voice steady despite the rage coursing through his veins like molten steel. Police and Child Protective Services arrived within minutes, their professional demeanor cracking when they saw the conditions Zara had been living in. Even hardened officers who had seen the worst of humanity struggled to maintain their composure when faced with the systematic torture of a child. Detective Maria Santos, a 20-year veteran of the force, had to step away from the scene twice to compose herself. She had investigated child abuse cases before, but the methodical cruelty evidenced in Zara's imprisonment went beyond typical neglect into territory that challenged her faith in humanity. Photographs were taken from every angle, documenting not just the physical conditions, but the psychological impact visible in Zara's behavior. Evidence bags filled with the meager possessions that constituted her entire world: a torn blanket, a cracked plastic cup, scraps of food hidden like precious treasures. Statements were recorded, each witness account adding another layer to the prosecution's case. Marlowe's arrest was swift, but her defense was as predictable as it was repugnant. She claimed Zara was a problem child who refused to stay in her room and preferred the outdoor space of the chicken coop. She painted herself as a struggling guardian, doing her best with a difficult child, complete with crocodile tears and protestations of misunderstood love. Her attorney, a soulless mercenary who specialized in defending the indefensible, attempted to frame the case as a tragic misunderstanding. They portrayed Marlowe as overwhelmed and under-resourced, suggesting that the chicken coop was a creative solution to behavioral problems rather than a torture chamber. She had bank records showing the money Thorne sent, meticulously documented to demonstrate her responsible handling of his support payments. But conveniently, she had no receipts for child-related expenses, no medical records, no school supplies, no clothing purchases, no toys or books or any of the 1,000 things a growing child needs. The legal system moved slowly, each day a fresh torment for Thorne, who wanted immediate justice for his daughter. But Thorne was relentless, channeling his military training into a different kind of campaign. He hired the best family attorney his savings could afford, a fierce advocate named Jennifer Walsh, who specialized in cases involving military families. He demanded full medical examinations for Zara, documenting every sign of neglect and abuse with scientific precision. X-rays revealed old fractures that had healed without medical attention. Blood tests showed severe malnutrition and vitamin deficiencies. Psychological evaluations painted a picture of a child who had endured systematic trauma designed to break her spirit. He collected statements from neighbors who had witnessed but failed to report, school officials who had noted Zara's declining attendance and appearance but hadn't followed up, and medical professionals who could testify to the long-term effects of the treatment she had endured. Each piece of evidence was another nail in Marlowe's coffin, another step toward the justice his daughter deserved. The story spread through the small Oklahoma town like wildfire. Local news picked it up, then regional stations, then national outlets. The image of a soldier returning home to find his child living in a chicken coop struck a nerve with Americans across the country. Support poured in from unexpected places. Veteran organizations rallied around Thorne. Child advocacy groups used Zara's case to highlight systemic failures in protective services. Social media campaigns raised funds for her medical care and therapy. Strangers sent cards, gifts, and offers of help. The overwhelming public response forced local authorities to take the case seriously. Suddenly, the prosecutors who had initially been inclined toward plea bargains were facing a community demanding full accountability. Marlowe found herself not just facing criminal charges, but public scorn from a nation horrified by her cruelty. The trial was swift and decisive, faced with overwhelming evidence, photographic documentation, and a parade of witnesses. Marlowe's defense crumbled. Medical experts testified about Zara's malnutrition, developmental delays caused by prolonged stress, and the psychological trauma of isolation. Financial experts demonstrated the systematic theft of funds meant for a child's care. The judge's sentencing was scathing. Beyond the criminal penalties, Marlowe was ordered to pay full restitution to Thorne, covering not just the stolen support payments, but medical expenses, therapy costs, and punitive damages. Her public humiliation was complete when local businesses refused to serve her, former friends shunned her, and she was forced to leave town entirely. But for Thorne, the legal victory felt hollow. Justice couldn't undo the 3 years of hell his daughter had endured. It couldn't restore her stolen childhood or erase the trauma that would take years to heal. Thorne used his military discharge benefits and the legal settlement to create the safest possible environment for Zara's recovery. They moved to a new town, far from the memories and painful associations of their old life. He chose a small community in Colorado, where the mountain air was clean and the pace of life was gentle enough to allow for healing. He enrolled her in trauma-informed therapy, with specialists who understood the unique challenges of neglect and abuse. Dr. Sarah Martinez became a crucial ally in Zara's recovery, using play therapy and art therapy to help the child process experiences that were too overwhelming for words. Progress was slow and often heartbreaking. Zara had night terrors for months, waking up screaming about being trapped in small, dark spaces. She hoarded food, hiding scraps under her bed, in her pockets, anywhere she could secret away provisions, because she couldn't trust that meals would come regularly. The abundance of food in their new home seemed to terrify her more than comfort her. She flinched at sudden movements and spoke in whispers, as if she was still afraid that making noise would bring punishment. For weeks she wouldn't sleep in her new bedroom, instead choosing to curl up in corners or under tables, seeking the confined spaces that had become familiar during her imprisonment. But gradually, with infinite patience and professional help, glimpses of the little girl Thorne remembered began to emerge. The first breakthrough came 3 months after her rescue, when she tentatively reached for his hand during a walk in the park. The gesture was small, but it represented a monumental step in rebuilding trust. The first time she laughed, really laughed, at a silly joke he made during breakfast. He had to excuse himself to cry in private. When she finally felt safe enough to ask for a hug instead of waiting for him to initiate contact, it felt like a miracle more profound than any victory he had achieved in combat. Thorne dedicated himself entirely to her recovery, restructuring his entire life around her needs. He turned down job opportunities that would require travel, chose their new home based on the quality of local schools and therapeutic resources, and structured every day around rebuilding her sense of safety and security. He learned to read her triggers, to recognize when she was becoming overwhelmed, and to provide comfort without overwhelming her with his own emotions. Slowly, carefully, they began to rebuild their relationship. Story time returned, though now he let her choose when she was ready. Cooking together became a new tradition, teaching her that she could trust food would always be available. Most importantly, he learned to let her set the pace, never pushing her to recover faster than she was ready. Today, 3 years after her rescue, Zara is thriving in ways that once seemed impossible. She's back in school, excelling academically, with the same bright intelligence that had defined her before the trauma. She's making friends carefully, but genuinely, learning to trust other children in the way that only time and safety can teach. Her laughter, once thought lost forever, has returned, not exactly the same as before, carrying now a deeper appreciation for joy, but authentic and healing. Her recovery is a testament to the incredible resilience of children and the transformative power of unconditional love. She still has difficult days when the memories surface unexpectedly, still sometimes hoards food in her backpack as a security measure, still occasionally chooses to sleep on the floor rather than her comfortable bed. But these behaviors are becoming less frequent, replaced gradually by the normal concerns of a 10-year-old girl: friendships, school projects, which books to read next. Thorne has documented her journey, not for public consumption, but as a reminder of how far they've both traveled from that horrible day when he found her in the chicken coop. Photos show a gradual transformation, the hollow-eyed wraith slowly filling out, gaining weight and color, the fearful posture gradually relaxing into the natural confidence of a child who knows she is loved and protected. But her story is also a stark reminder of how easily the system can fail the most vulnerable among us, and how the conspiracy of silence among adults can enable unconscionable cruelty. How many other children are suffering in similar situations right now, while neighbors notice something odd but convince themselves it's not their responsibility? How many warning signs are ignored because confronting the truth requires courage that seems too costly? The statistics are sobering and heartbreaking. According to the National Child Abuse and Neglect Data System, more than 650,000 children are victims of abuse and neglect each year in the United States alone. For every case that comes to light, experts estimate that dozens more remain hidden behind closed doors, protected by the silence of adults who choose not to see, not to hear, not to act. Zara's case wasn't unique in its brutality. It was unique only in that someone finally had the power and determination to do something about it. How many other military families have trusted the wrong person with their most precious treasure? How many other children are locked away, systematically tortured, while support checks are cashed and explanations are accepted at face value? Thorne has become an advocate for military families, working tirelessly to ensure that deployment doesn't leave children vulnerable to exploitation. He speaks at conferences across the country, his voice carrying the moral authority that comes from having lived through the worst-case scenario. He lobbies for stronger oversight of guardian arrangements, mandatory background checks, and regular unannounced inspections for children in temporary care. His message resonates particularly strongly with veteran communities, where the trust placed in caregivers often comes with life or death stakes. Military families face unique vulnerabilities: sudden deployments, extended separations, limited family support networks that predators can exploit. Thorne's advocacy has resulted in new protocols that require multiple references, psychological evaluations, and surprise home visits for anyone seeking to become a temporary guardian for military children. He supports legislation that would make it harder for predators to hide behind bureaucratic blindness and social politeness. He works with lawmakers to close loopholes that allow abusers to shop for jurisdictions with weaker oversight, to eliminate the bureaucratic delays that leave children in dangerous situations while paperwork is processed. Zara's case sparked immediate changes in local child protective services protocols, requiring more thorough and frequent home inspections. The agency was forced to acknowledge that their previous family reunification at all costs philosophy had prioritized the comfort of adults over the safety of children. New guidelines require caseworkers to speak with children privately, to look for signs of coaching, and to trust their instincts when something feels wrong, even if they can't immediately prove it. Neighbor reporting systems were strengthened after the community grappled with their collective failure to protect Zara. Educational programs were implemented to help people recognize signs of abuse and understand their moral and legal obligation to act. The mind-your-own-business culture that had enabled Marlowe's cruelty was challenged directly, replaced with a children are everyone's business philosophy that makes it socially unacceptable to ignore suffering. The chicken coop still stands in the backyard of their old house, now serving as a grim memorial to how quickly innocence can be stolen when good people choose silence over action. The current owners wanted to tear it down, but Thorne asked them to leave it standing. He visits occasionally, not to relive the trauma, but to remind himself why his advocacy work matters. But it also represents something else, proof that even in the darkest circumstances, love can triumph over evil when someone refuses to give up. It stands as evidence that no child is truly helpless as long as there are adults willing to fight for them, to speak for them, to refuse to accept that cruelty is inevitable. Thorne's message is simple but profound. Children's safety is everyone's responsibility. If you see something wrong, speak up immediately. If you suspect abuse, report it without hesitation. If you witness neglect, act decisively. Because somewhere, right now, a child is depending on your courage to save them from their own personal hell. The next time you hear a child crying, and it doesn't sound quite right, don't assume someone else will investigate. Don't convince yourself it's probably nothing serious. Don't wait for someone else to be the hero, because that child might be waiting for you specifically to save their life. Don't let politeness and social convention become accomplices to cruelty. Don't let bureaucracy become a shield for predators. Don't let your discomfort with confrontation cost a child their childhood, their safety, or their life. Because as Zara's story proves, sometimes the difference between a child's salvation and their destruction is simply whether one person decides to care enough to act. Sometimes being a hero doesn't require superpowers or special training. It just requires the moral courage to do what's right when everyone else is choosing to look away.